Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Seth Miranda here for Adorama TV, and this is the new Sony RX10 Mark V. This is essentially the update, the next evolution of what is Sony's bridge camera. And some of you might be asking, well, what is a bridge camera? Well, it actually bridges that gap between SLR, DSLR, interchangeable lenses, where it's like a whole system. It's bigger in form factor, costs more money. It's a bit of a commitment. It's a whole system, right? And the other side of that gap, which is point and shoot, which is maybe a little bit of functionality, but really easy to use, very portable. And so this sits right in the middle, where it is basically like a small SLR feeling camera with a fixed lens. But another aspect of it is that it's easy to use, and it gives you what they call a super zoom. So that is a real optical zoom, not digital zoom. So it's an actual lens with a lot of travel, so that you're not cropping pixels inside your camera for what digital zoom really is, which is throwing data away. Here, you have a 20.1 megapixel stacked sensor that is 1 inch. So it's a smaller form factor combined with a longer lens travel, which gives you the feel of a lot of reach. So instead of going for a bigger system with a massively long lens to get in there, if you're doing something like safari or shooting your kid's sports game or whatever you need to get a lot of reach, you have it here. But it also gives you a nice wide angle that if something comes close to you or you're just walking around, want to shoot some street, you can do that as well. So it's got a lot of versatility in a small form factor, if that makes any sense. In fact, when you take a look at this camera all over, it's going to tell you that it's a 24 to 600 millimeter zoom. But if you look really closely at the fine ghost print inscription on that lens, it'll say 35 millimeter angle of view equivalent, which is exactly right, because this lens is actually a 9.1 millimeter to 210 millimeter f2.4 to f4. I'll get to that in a second. But really what you're doing is you're shooting pre-cropped almost, but you are using an optical lens with all that travel to keep that 20.1 resolution the whole way. Whether it's at 9.1 millimeter all the way to 10 millimeter, you're still getting 20.1 megapixels, which is cool. And the other thing is that a camera like this leans into the benefits of having a small form factor sensor, not only with the size and everything, but things like, 30 frames per second, and being a stacked sensor, it is going to give you blackout free shooting with those 30 frames per second stills, which is really nice. You're not missing anything. If you're shooting action, you're shooting birds, whatever, you're never, that image is never leaving your eye as you're shooting. So up to 30 frames per second, pretty nice, right? And the f2.4 to f4 that I mentioned before, well, as you zoom that lens, you are going to lose some light. So at the long end, it'll hit you at f4, but it starts at 2.4 in the wide end. And I'd say at around 100 millimeters on this lens when you start feeling that loss of light. But physics are physics, kids. And it is part of what keeps this a smaller form factor. Otherwise, the front of this lens would be massive. In fact, the first thing I did was jump on top of a roof I have access to just to see what the reach is like, because that's what this is about. It gives you that feel of having a lot of reach or getting in there when you need to. And I was just on that roof, starting out as wide as I can, zooming into these trains, and you can see just what it's like to get closer and closer. So you have an idea of what it is applicable to whatever you're shooting. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what that zoom range is really like. Although I did put this late into some pretty questionable situations later on. We'll get into what I did with this in a second, but let's first walk around this camera a little bit and talk about what's going on here physically with this camera. So, as I mentioned, that 9.1 to 210 millimeter lens with the 20.1 stacked 1 inch sensor, but you also have an updated processor here, the Bions XR, with that Sony AI processing unit alongside it. So you're getting the newer autofocus algorithms. Don't forget, the Mark IV of this camera came out in 2017. There's been a bunch of jumps, right? And you get real-time autofocus tracking now. And that includes recognizing not just an eyeball, but it sees the back of people's heads, recognizes a human, sees what's happening in front of the lens as a subject, not just looking for eyeballs. And that gives you a little bit more of like a predictive autofocus, so that it's getting ready for the eye if someone moves their head or whatever. So all over, you're just getting better autofocus capability overall. The other thing you have to realize is that you're getting a USB-C port here. This is a big deal. I know people think it's just like a port, but that USB-C port unlocks a lot of things, including being able to just plug this into your computer with one cable. USB-C gives you power, video and audio in one cable to your computer to become a webcam, which can get up to 4K 30p, and it can record to the memory card while you're streaming. So you can stream, or let's say you're on a vacation and this is the only camera you take, which is kind of what I think the ethos of these cameras are, is that you just take this like all-encompass system. Let's say you got to hop on a work call or whatever, jump onto Microsoft Teams, Zoom, whatever it is, set this down, plug in the cable, and you're good. So that's very nice to see. Plus, you can charge the battery that way, which means you don't have to carry around a charger if you don't want to. I'm a big believer in traveling lighter is better sometimes, and not having a charger is nice to have, especially if you're someone that's not used to carrying a lot of gear with you. However, I will say the battery is pretty great on this. It takes the Sony Z batteries, but I shot 2 events and I got through only half a battery, and I didn't even touch my second battery. So I was pretty impressed with the battery life overall, and they do boast that this is something of a 50% added stamina to the battery, or I think that's their wording, and I totally believe it. Just like the RX10 IV, you still have a single slot SD card slot here, but on the 4, it was a UHS 1, which is a slower card. This is UHS 1 and 2, so if you have faster cards, you can use them in here. So it looks like you have a new viewfinder in here and OLED LCD over here. So it is a 3.6 million dot resolution EVF, which is cool, but also 120 frames per second, which is nice and smooth, especially if you're shooting something like action or panning or whatever. Having that frame rate is really nice. The screen is 1.68 million dot resolution. It is 3-inch, and don't forget that screen is full touch. So if you're someone that doesn't want to dig around menus, not sure what to press, whatever, if you see it on the screen, touch it and you can adjust it. But it is tilty, not flippy outy. So if you want to flip it out to film yourself, that's probably not going to happen here, but you can run the micro HDMI port to a monitor of some kind, or you have the 5G Wi-Fi in here, which can connect to the Creator app for all the remote capability, as well as all the creative capability that's in the Creator's app itself. So that's pretty nice connectivity overall. There is no front dial on here, so keep that in mind, but you do have the front rocker for the power zoom. And if you're someone that has that muscle memory to actually zoom from the lens, you can do that as well. And you have 3 settings for the speed. So depending on how much you want to zoom in relation to how much you're spinning that ring, you can dial it into something that feels pretty more intuitive to you. So like I said, it's up to 30 frames per second in stills, but let's say you want to save some memory card space, so you don't need that 30 frames per second all the time, but you might need it in certain situations, like sports or whatever. You can totally set one of your function buttons here to speed boost, which is one of the newer functions in the newer Sony cameras, which you wouldn't have without a newer version of this camera, which is very cool to see. So if you want to just save that speed boost when you need it, map that function button and you're good to go. And since you don't have that front dial, which I would usually put to aperture, you do have an aperture ring on the lens itself. Don't forget that also on the lens, you have a D-click switch, which is nice. You can either click into your f-stops if you want, or sit between them. Or if you're someone that's shooting video and you want to have like a smooth iris open and close, you can do that. So make sure you check out that D-click switch depending on what you want to do with this camera. Also on that lens, you have a focus limiter switch, which is great because if you are someone that's going to be shooting something that's long distance the whole time and you don't want to have the camera deal with the entire range of this long lens to focus with, you can limit it to just be 3 meters to infinity as opposed to the entire range when you're not going to be shooting close up anyway. When I say this is a very versatile type of camera, it doesn't just have super zoom. You have macro capability here as well, and it's really nice. Actually, on the widest angle, 9.1 millimeter, you're looking at under 2 inches of minimum focusing distance, and if you go all the way out to 210 millimeter, you're looking at around 28 inches of minimum focusing distance, which is very nice to see. So if you're out there and you want to shoot some flowers, insects, whatever, go for it. And here you can see the socket end of a fluorescent light bulb tube that's been smashed. Very nice and close up in some low light. I will get into what that's about in a moment. And it's got a lot of video functionality as well. I'm talking about 4K 60 without a crop. It does crop for 4K 120 if you want some slow-mo, but it is 422 10-bit, which is great. And you get S-Cinetone, S-Log3, monitor LUTs, importing LUTs, so it's pretty capable for video. And I do know that there's a lot of people out there that use these in lieu of camcorders or interchangeably with camcorders, like schools and stuff like that. So if you're looking to like film your kid's recital, you might already have something capable of doing that if you go with something like this. So now that we know what this camera is all about with the hardware, what exactly did I do with the camera to try it out? Well, it's 102 degrees here in New York. We're going through a heat wave. It's horrible. but it's also 4th of July weekend, and there are a couple of events that I'm going to. So I brought this with me, and these events are both indie wrestling, but completely different. I'm talking venue, the lighting, the style, the accessibility, everything is completely different. So I thought, great, let's do this. You know, I mounted an Osmo to the side of the camera so I can get some B-roll for you guys of what I was dealing with in the environment I was in while I'm doing it. And the first stop was New Fear City. They always do a huge July 4th bash, and they always do it at a cool venue. So it's local. It's my boy Nick who puts it together. So I had to go over there and check it out. I got in there, gave him what's up, and I realized quickly, all right, it's in a low light environment, but I knew this was going to happen. So I went to go reach for the pop-up flash that I knew the RX10 Mark IV had. Well, guess what, kids? There is no pop-up flash in the RX10 Mark V, so be aware of that. Some people might not think that's a big deal. I myself really like pop-up flashes. They're great when you need them. They're just there, right? And I thought it would go really good with this gritty, grimy environment. It's super punk in here. I mean, we're talking about an environment where we got punk bands playing, and then they get off stage and you get tattooed by people in this band. I mean, come on, how cool is that? However, it wasn't just low light. It was subjects being backlit constantly. And if there was light on the subject, it was mixed, it was low light. And I was trying to use the light on Nick's camera while he was filming to get as much as I can. Tried to keep it in spot metering to try to calm the ISO down as much as I could, but there was no getting around it. I had to raise the ISO while also keeping a shutter speed that frees the action enough to where it wasn't just blurry, blur. But there was just something to it that was worth looking at. And I was shooting at 30 frames per second when I could, because I just wanted to see these, you know, sequential shots. And what's very cool is in a lot of these shots, you can actually see someone else's flash getting caught in the full frame of the shot, which shows you the fast readout speed and just how fast you're able to shoot 30 frames a second. So if you're someone that is shooting sports, or maybe are trying to photograph your kid at doing their sports, and you're not used to timing yourself for the key moment, you have the 30 frames a second to lean on if you want to, and you'll probably pull something that you do like out of whatever happened there in front of your lens. So here, we're in a low light environment and there's no ring. This is what they call hardcore wrestling, right? And it's props, it's performative art, don't start. But it's a lot of fun, and you're in it. I mean, it's happening around you. I'm talking a couple of feet from me. So having that 9.1 millimeter lens was really nice. I was nice and wide. I didn't worry about people getting too close because the minimum focusing distance is so great. And you can see these sequence shots that I'm just seeing in full range. And if I wanted to, I could actually make these into GIF animations, because you're essentially shooting video at 30 frames per second. All things considered, even though I had to push the ISO pretty hard, I mean, I was very seldomly below 8,000 ISO. Maybe I hit 4,000 ISO if I'm lucky here or there. It did pretty well. And if you're not going to be using the raw files, if you're someone that's just going to go right to the JPEG, you do have noise reduction in this camera that you can lean on for the JPEGs. So just be aware of that. This is also a pre-production unit, so also be aware of that. However, I will say the autofocus did really well in this low light, which is one thing I was worried about, because when you don't have enough light, the cameras have trouble detecting subjects, stuff like that. But I kept it on tracking the entire time, and it was able to see people, stay with them. You know, here and there, it got super dark and it had a moment, but all in all, it did a pretty good job, and I think the images are pretty cool nonetheless. I wish I had an on-camera flash for that really gritty look and that super sharp, like, blitz of paparazzi light, but, you know, I would have brought a flash if I knew, right? There was even some cases where I was maxing out the ISO here because I had no choice, really. And I know these all look like video clips maybe, but this is just sequential stills going through. I didn't hit a buffer on the camera. The card wasn't getting bottlenecked. It was great. Even got a chance to try out the macro when I saw some of the broken fluorescent light bulbs on the ground. I caught the socket end, that connector, and got nice and close to it. Put the camera on the ground, slowed the shutter a little bit to ease up that ISO, and it was pretty cool. Just be able to do that and not have to worry, will it focus? No, it just does. So while all this low light and griminess was fun, I knew that the sun was going to start falling, and I had a ticket to go to GCW at the ballpark in Coney Island. So I quickly bounced out early. I missed the main event of New Fear City. Oh, sorry, Nick. But that train got me to Coney Island a little under an hour. The sun was starting to fall already. I caught the second half of their bash at the ballpark. You can see it's just nice. There's actually light to work with. You got the iconic needle in the background. I got my name on a second row from ringside seat, which is fun, right? So once I found that seat, I took a look and I go, okay, So this is a completely different feel. We no longer we're in the middle of the action type access, as opposed to when I was physically pushing these wrestlers off of me at that bar. Here, I'm behind a security barrier, so I'm gonna need that long lens reach, right? And it was great because while I had all that light, that's cool, I had a nice environment to show, but I also was able to zoom in and show the actual emotion and expressions on the performers' faces, which tell a lot of the story that's going on inside that ring. It is very cool to be able to get that close and see the little mannerisms in the face, even hear them talking, stuff like that. But the lens was really able to just get me in there, right? So that's kind of one of the superpowers of this type of camera. But the other thing was, when the main event was starting, Nick Gage was coming out. And when he was saying hello to the crowd, he was coming around the ring, slapping people's hands, moving phones out of his face. I didn't have to worry about, oh, I have too long of a lens to capture this or swing to a second body. I just zoomed out and I was able to get some frames of him walking right past me, a couple of feet from me, and saying what's up to somebody he knows. And that just shows you like how versatile and how quick you can work with this camera. So I was just getting some sequential shots, getting some tight on the face portraiture, sort of, I guess you would call it. And the light was falling crazy fast. Before I knew it, I was back to having to boost up the ISO a bunch and keep the shutter speed to a point where it was just on the verge of giving me blurs because I was worried about that. And then before the night ended, I decided to throw it into S&Q mode, which the RX10 IV doesn't have. This does have, which gives you a nice quick slow-mo video, which I got them, Nick Gage and Joey going through, I think it was a door or something like that. They just smashed right through from the top rope, which is always a good time, right? I was able to get those shots though, wrestlers celebrating with the iconic Coney Island needle behind them and stuff like that. It was very, very cool. And I just was able to pack this thing into a small bag that I threw on my back, and I was able to get out of there and enjoy the fireworks for the rest of the night. So all in all, it's just a very easy to use, versatile camera that is going to give you a lot of capability if you're not even sure what you're going to be getting into for the day, if you think you can't get close to a subject, if you need to film something on the fly and you are going between stills and video, you can do that pretty quickly. If you need fast frames per second, you have a lot of interesting capability here. It is a pretty advanced version of what we traditionally know of a bridge camera. So I think this is worth taking a look at if you are into this style of camera. I know it's not for everyone, but those of you that are into this type of camera, the bridge camera overall, this is a pretty strong offering from Sony. So check out the link down below for the full features, specs, all that kind of stuff. Don't forget to subscribe if you're into videos like this. We put out 1 or 2 of them every single day. But for now, I will see you over on the Events channel live. My name's Seth Miranda. Hit like. I'll see you on the next one. Later. Okay. Horns honking ruined my life. Okay.